Welcome to The Power of Potential, a podcast hosted and produced by St. Rose High School in Belmar, New Jersey. The show is dedicated to helping parents navigate the world of private education while showcasing the potential of its students, teachers, and alumni. St. Rose High School has been empowering potential since 1923. Now, here are your hosts, Director of Communications, Michael Falgaris, and from the class of 2024, Ariana Simon.
Hi, welcome to the Power Potential Podcast. I'm Maryanne Simon.
Here I am, and I'm Michael Falgaris.
Today we're going to be talking to Senora Delgado about a project she does with her students about immigration. So it'll be interesting. We'll see.
And I'm excited that you are here. You're one of my favorite teachers at St. Rose, my favorite colleague. I think you do an excellent job for the students at St. Rose High School and really just elevating your education. It's really just a pleasure to be in your classroom and see all the exciting things that you're doing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate those words. It's a pleasure. I'm really excited that I'm here with two of my students. And this is one of my favorite topics, immigration. And we want to tell you about what we do in the classroom.
So how does immigration fit into the curriculum?
Well, anything about identity and culture goes within the curriculum, and this is a topic that is very close to my heart. First of all, because I am an immigrant, and also as important, this is a land of immigrants. The tapestry of this country, every thread of it is from a different culture. So we're very colorful, we're very diverse. And I think that is wonderful. And I like to explore that in depth with my students.
And you have two students here today. I know that we have a third, David Oliver, that couldn't be here, or he might stop in because we have AP testing throughout the building for the past 2 weeks. And he's one of those students. But who do we have?
I am Maura Downing, and I will be talking about my grandmother who immigrated from Ireland, and she came over to America in the 1950s. So I will be telling a bit about her story and how I take great pride in her success in the Americas.
And tell me a little bit about how many years have you had Senora Delgado as a teacher?
Just this year. I have Senora Delgado for Honors Spanish 3. And I love her class. It's very enjoyable, and I always look forward to it.
Thank you, Maura.
How many years have you taken a world language?
3 years in high school. In middle school, I had a little bit of background knowledge of the Spanish language, but we didn't really go too into the language that much. So really just 3 years.
And do you go into the culture as well besides the language?
Yes, definitely. Senora Delgado really works to teach us about our identity, not just the grammar and the vocab. I think she really tries to teach us about ourselves and how we can really take a lot of pride in who we are.
That's awesome. And who are you?
So I'm James McGranny. And I'll be talking about my great grandfather, George Henry Goebel, and he immigrated from Germany in 1882 on a boat, and he passed through Ellis Island also in one of the beginning years. And this is also my first year having Senora Delgado, and it's been a pleasure, and I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Great. Taking a world language, I remember in high school, I'm a little older than. I didn't have a teachers. I went to public school. I didn't have the teachers that really just had a love of the language and wanting to share it. And I think you do. You love the language.
Let me tell you, I've heard that comment said many, many times. And one of the reasons is the plans have been revamped. They have been totally redesigned. We no longer have the teacher that teaches vocab and grammar only. It's always what is it the students need to communicate and the culture. And we're always comparing their culture with other cultures. So it's totally different. So that's how the topic of immigration comes so handy and so beautifully into the class, because it's about identity. Who are we? So that's how I start talking about that. Who are we? And why do we do the things we do? And why do we celebrate the way we celebrate? And why we pray the way we pray?
Sure.
And all that has to do with who is our family, who are your parents, grandparents, and we can go back, and that defines us. So we start talking about immigration and saying, okay, why people come here in the first place? Okay, so it's a place that is in general welcomes the immigrant. This is a country made by immigrants. Yes, and other parts of the world. Why do people leave their countries? So we start looking at war and violence, famine, hunger, and lack of jobs, lack of opportunities, and these are the things that make people leave. Nobody wants to raise a family in the middle of violence and poverty. Everybody wants a better life for their kids. And they decide to leave. And they can be entire families, or one, or teenagers, or little kids. We see immigrants in every single age group.
So do you study the immigration process on what happens when you come to America?
We do. We see, we start with a little bit of European immigration, and we analyze some stories that we have. I use some the founder of Anheuser-Busch. There's a little clip that was shown in one of the Super Bowls that I love, and shows the story. So I show that video in class, and we create the story. Why did he leave? Why did he come? What happened? Did he suffer social prejudice? Yes or no? What did he do? And what happened? And it's a successful story, like 1 in a million,
yes,
or several millions. But it's a nice story.
Amazing, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then we also talk about the Central America immigration. I'm from Honduras, and this is also very close to my heart. And we see why these people are leaving. Because they have to. They can't raise their kids there because of the poverty and violence. And they walk through Guatemala and Mexico.
And that's another point that we need to have you back on for another episode, just to discuss. Even though you've immigrated, you've not forgotten your homeland.
No.
And the projects that you are involved in by building medical facilities and places for people to go to get the care that they need. It's just really, it's amazing.
Oh, yeah, we'll have to talk about that one. Yeah.
So, Maura, tell me what you know about, or what you learned through this process about your family member that immigrated. Tell me a little bit about that.
So my grandmother, her name was Bridget Connolly. She was born in Sligo in Ireland. And she had 12 siblings. She was one of 12.
Wow.
A big family, yeah. And I remember my grandfather, he's still alive, luckily. Unfortunately, my grandma, she passed a couple years ago. But my grandfather, he was telling me all about her story, and he was saying that the home that my grandmother's family lived in, there was only 3 bedrooms. It was a very small house, and obviously not a lot of room for 12 kids and 2 parents. So I remember my grandmother's father, he was really pushing for the kids to have a better life and to achieve the American dream. He wanted them to travel to the States and really find some opportunities to make a life for themselves.
Yeah.
And I believe most of the siblings actually did stay in Ireland. However, my grandma and 3 of her sisters did travel over on a ship to the States, passed through Ellis Island, and they were living up in North Jersey, around Montclair and Bloomfield. And my grandmother, she went to secretary school, and she worked hard. And my mom, she was able to go to college, and her siblings. And I think through coming to the States, she's really created a great foundation for my family, my mother's side.
It's a really great
good
story.
It's a really great story.
I was talking to my mom last night, who was from Sicily. She came over at 9 years old, and she doesn't have the self-confidence that I do. Is David here?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey,
David.
David.
Oh, I might even give up my chair for David.
Okay.
David, you could, you come over here and sit down.
Welcome.
Muy
Do you know who
bien,
this
David.
is? This is Maura. Yeah, have a seat. This is perfect timing. You were taking an AP exam?
Yeah. Yeah, I was in AP chemistry today. It was a long one, so
And we had AP U.S. history yesterday.
yeah.
So, long
Thanks
week.
for the seat, by the way.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll figure it out here. So she doesn't have the self-confidence that other people do, but I think that she came over at 9. They didn't have any programs for English as a second language like
Right.
they do here, so she really was like sink or swim.
Yeah.
And she remembers it being a very big struggle.
Yes.
to overcome
it still,
that,
it
to
still happens.
assimilate.
It's something that people still go through that. And people say, why don't the immigrants speak English? Wait a minute. It's a process, right?
Sure.
And these kids, as
Yes.
learners of the second language, can attest. It's hard.
It's hard.
to
Yes.
learn the second language.
So,
So, yes.
So James, tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah. So, George Henry Goebel is my great grandfather, and him and like the rest of the extended family, they lived in Germany at the time and in Hamburg, and they were a family of bakers and they owned a bakery in Hamburg, and they were settled and everything. And then the war started in Germany, and my great grandfather at the time, he was like 15 or 16 at the time, and that was the age you had to fight in the war, and he didn't want to become a Hessian mercenary. And like the whole family always heard rumors and like word to mouth legends about like all of the great American states, like you can achieve your dreams there. And then in May of 1882, he decided that it was his best choice, so he immigrated from Hamburg on a boat to Ellis Island, and he left Germany in May and then arrived in July in New York. And he went through the whole Ellis Island situation and everything. And he worked in a restaurant as a dishwasher for a couple years in New York and just kind of got settled and then just lived what he had and really didn't have anything, no family. He was 16 doing what he could. And then eventually he decided to move up to upstate New York in Dogeville, New York. And there he just he continued working in a restaurant, doing what he knew from Germany and bringing his culture and living with it. And then he met his wife in, about 1890, 91, at some time around there. And then he married her and they moved to Syracuse, New York. And in Syracuse, New York, they opened a bakery, which is what he knew, and brought his recipes and everything and opened it there. And then part of the rest of the family from Germany came over around that time and lived above the bakery and worked as bakers and everything. And then the bakery closed in about the 1980s, so it was open for...
Wow, that's a long time.
It was open. So it was in my family for a while. I've never been there, but my grandma was telling me stories about going there and the great cakes and everything. And so, yeah, so basically the one thing he learned was he brought what he had with him to America and used it to bring him up.
Yeah, that's very, very similar to my great-grandfather. He lived in Italy during Mussolini, and he knew that the war was coming, and he didn't want to be there for war, so he left and went through Ellis Island, came here, and came through Ellis Island, lived in New Jersey, and in a very poor area with mostly other Italian immigrants. And that's where he met my great-grandmother. But he was a barber in Italy, and he brought that over, and he owned a barber shop till he was in his 60s, and he loved that. And it was that same story of you just brought over part of what you did in your homeland, and he knew so many people all around town. They lived in Asbury Park for most of their life, and there are still people that, like older people, that will come up to my grandmother and say, "Oh, I knew your father, he did my hair, or did my grandfather's hair," or something, and it's crazy.
That's really cool, yeah. That's actually like kind of the same case with my grandfather too. His father ended up leaving when he was like 11, came to the United States. Now that we don't know too much about him other than he lived in Texas as a ranger or like a sheriff. And then he ended up for not escaping war, but like getting drafted into one. So since his father was a U.S. citizen, it was like 1949 when they drafted him for the Korean War, like 1949, 1950. My grandfather, because they were like, because your father is a citizen, you know, we consider you a citizen, we need extra reserves, and we need people like in line, basically. So they drafted him and his brother, and they ended up going over, but his brother was the only one who ended up serving because he wasn't like physically fit enough, because in Lebanon, where he came from, there's a small village on the border of Lebanon and Syria, and they had like nothing, like no shoes, no money, barely any food, like just a house, like a hut.
No retro fitness.
Nothing. No McDonald's, nothing. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But yeah, he ended up coming over, and it's a commonality with a lot of immigrants. They bring what they have. What he had was literally just manual labor. That's like all he knew what to do. He barely knew how to read and write. He went to like 1 year of high school in Lebanon. He I saw his high school like ID card. It's really funny looking, but it's really old looking too. And you know, today it's hard to ask him about these things because he has really bad dementia. But when he was able to talk to me about it, he said, you know, he came over similar to James's great grandfather, Ellis Island. And the first thing he did was find some job that he could do. So he ended up truck driving when he got his license. He ended up truck driving, manual labor, or helping like the truck drivers load the trucks if he couldn't drive. And then he ended up becoming a part of like a Greek Orthodox or like a Middle Eastern Orthodox church in North Jersey called St. George. It's in Little Falls, actually.
Oh, I know. I know.
Yeah, it's really. They had an older church, and there's videos on YouTube of them. And he used to be a cantor, like a singer. So that was like one of his things that he could do. And I know it's really cool. When I was little, we used to go up there all the time, even though we live in Brick in South Central Jersey. We would go up, take the hour trip, and he used to cant even when like he was like 80, 83, but now he's like 92, so he can't he doesn't remember how to do it. So
What you mentioned about the dementia, it's sad when you think about all those memories start to fade away.
all the stories.
All the stories.
Yeah.
We have to remember them passed down. So
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
They did a project recently with people from the Holocaust. You know, there's only a few Holocaust survivors still alive. And they did this project where they recorded them and they asked them hundreds and hundreds of questions. And the interview took multiple days. And they put it into something with AI. So in the future, students would be able to go on their computer and interview the person, a survivor, who might have now passed, by asking them questions. And they thought of every question to ask them.
That's really cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And it made me think, you know, if we can get our grandparents together and just even with our iPhones and just record and ask them questions so that when you guys have kids, you can go back to this podcast or other recordings and pass down those stories.
And thinking about that, this is part of my thinking with this project. You know, when I was in another school, I would ask the kids, "What's your grandfather's name?" "I don't know, Grandpa." I'm like, no, we need to know.
Yeah.
We need to know more.
they have a lot of wisdom.
Yes. They've lived a lot. And going back to immigration, I just wanted to say that, yes, the immigrant comes with a shirt on their back and maybe a bag with the basics. But what else do they bring? We talk about this in class.
Yeah.
The culture, their religion, their music, their recipes, their poetry, their stories, their family stories, their traditional stories. Every immigrant brings so much richness into our society that we cannot afford not to interview them again, at least, or ask them about these things. So that's why the Immigration Project is hands down one of my favorites.
We could tell.
And my grandma, I know that she had this famous Irish soda bread recipe, and she would always be cooking it for my cousins and my parents, and it was so wonderful whenever we would all gather together. It was always a tradition for her to make her Irish soda bread. And one thing that I really I value about my grandmother was that she was very devoted to the church. That was one thing that she brought over from Ireland with her, was that she always went to church every Sunday with my grandfather. And I really look up to that because she was very devoted. And she would also always say that, America is full of opportunities and it's the greatest country in the world. And I think there's a lot of truth in that there's so many opportunities here. And when our ancestors bring over all their culture, they can assimilate that here and really just take part in their cultural identity and utilize that in the Americas to work hard and make something of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I'm impressed at listening to their stories and how much they know. I think it's an exercise that everyone should do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
David, you're the only senior here, right?
Yeah.
So you have a week left, 5 days. Sum up your high school experience here at St. Rose in a couple of.
I got you. Yeah. Well, I can say it's been a flash. I came in freshman year. I remember, and it's like I remember my first day walking in, but I didn't think it would go this quick. You come in as a freshman, like I have 4 years, but everybody's always saying like it's gonna go by quick, and you don't believe them.
Yeah.
But I can say I grew a lot through this, not just like physically, but like as a person. I met a lot of people, and I would say that's one of the most valuable things I have is the connections that I made. Like at this high school, not just the teachers and the faculty, even though that's amazing, all the students that have graduated like before me and then all that will graduate after me and with me. That is one of the most valuable things I will take out of St. Rose. The people that I met that changed me, like as a person for the better. So that's one of the greatest things. And then other than that, I would say the sports, like playing sports here was a lot of fun because that's where I met a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I enjoyed that a lot. Yeah, at least for me. So
yeah.
That's nice.
I do cross country and track. So I mean, track is my favorite part of the year. So yeah.
Well, you again, Senora, you're one of my favorites. I love.
Thank you so much. You know, it's mutual.
Yeah, thank you. It's especially in technology, being able to introduce new things and having a colleague that embraces it and says, "Yeah, I'll try it." Whether you're okay, it's okay to fail. You just keep going. You're not afraid of it, and it's refreshing. And I want to congratulate all of you. You did a great job on this project. I'm sure that I'm sure that
I'm glad you came.
Yeah, I tried my best. So.
It's a great project.
If your grandparents would be able to see this and share the story with them, I'm sure they'd be very proud. And the sacrifices that they made to be able to see that it was worth it.
Yes.
Yeah, I was telling the kids that I change it a little bit every year. Like before the pandemic, we used to go to Ellis Island. You went with us one year. And 1 year I had the students write a letter to the immigrant. I'm not going to do that again because I cried reading those letters. Oh, it was beautiful, but, it was lovely.
Yes. And imagine the stories that we're going to hear in the future.
Of course.
Things that have been going on recently.
Yes.
Of course.
Well, thank you again. Thanks for everyone for listening.
Thank you.
To see the behind-the-scenes episode, to get our show notes, and to even see some of the work that they did, check out our website at srhsnj.com/pop. And then on next week's episode, we got some more things coming up to the end of the school year. We're going to be interviewing one of our teachers that's retiring and some other great things. So stay tuned for that. Thanks, Maryanne, for being here, as always, leading us. And we'll see you next week.
All right, see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Power of Potential podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Subscribe to hear past and future episodes. Learn more about St. Rose by visiting our website at srhsnj.com.